Hey, good afternoon, Justin. Great to have you with us. And we wanted to interview all of the U.S. Senate candidates. This is Justin Amash. Citizens for Traditional Values is not endorsing in the primary, but we wanted to be sure and give everyone a chance to hear who these candidates are. So let's go to the first question, which is on the life issue. As you know, it's become an even bigger deal as the RNC changed some of the language on the platform. It's Republicans are still pro-life, thankfully. But as a U.S. Senator, in that capacity and in that authority, what would you do to eliminate the funding for national and international agencies that currently promote and perform abortions?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me on here. It really means a lot to talk to all of your viewers and share some of my thoughts on this. Um, I don't support federal funding for abortion providers. I don't believe that there should be federal funding for abortion providers. I'll vote against federal funding for abortion providers. One of the things, though, that often happens in Congress, and I've seen it with some of the other candidates, where you'll have someone in Congress and they'll vote on an amendment that doesn't fund the abortion provider. But then when the full bill comes to the floor that does include funding, they will then support the bill.
Gotcha.
And I won't support legislation that includes that kind of funding. I don't think it's right. And you have my commitment to that.
Great, great. That's great to hear. It's a very important, integral issue at the heart of what we do and what many feel. Let me jump right to our next question on education. And as we look at the Department of Education and what is its role, but even more recently with our current president trying to completely, by executive action, submit a proposal to change Title IX funding for schools, requiring them to allow boys into girls' locker rooms, boys to compete in girls' sports. What are your thoughts on that?
I think biological males should be competing in boy sports and biological females should be competing in girl sports. And that's designed that way to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to compete against people who are born with a lot of their same attributes. That doesn't mean that sometimes there aren't women who can compete with boys in terms of physical abilities,
Right.
but on average, we want boys competing with boys, girls competing with girls based on their biological differences, because that allows everyone to have the opportunity to compete and win and enjoy that period of their life.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have any other thoughts about the Department of Education in
Well,
particular.
I'd eliminate the Federal Department of Education, and I've sponsored legislation in that direction when I was in Congress, to eliminate the Department of Education. A lot of people don't understand that the Federal Department of Education does not provide very much funding to the state. So the state of Michigan only receives about 10% of the funding from the Federal Department of Education for education. And that money is just taken from our taxpayers anyways. So what ends up happening is some portion of money gets taken from Michigan taxpayers. It goes to the federal government. They give some of it back to us, not even all of it. And then they put a bunch of strings on things. So from my perspective, get rid of the Federal Department of Education and allow parents to make decisions and allow states to have more of the authority over education rather than the federal government. I still think that primarily this should be a decision between parents and teachers and local communities, but definitely not the federal government.
Great. Let me move on in terms of the federal government. Do you agree or disagree that the United States should maintain its sovereignty and decline to sign any other agreements or treaties with other global agencies? The WHO comes to mind. That's not the only one. To allow them to sign anything like that without full congressional approval.
Yeah, this is a great question. And when it comes to the treaty power, the Senate has control over this. The Senate is supposed to have the decision making when it comes to treaties, along with the president. But what's happened too often is the executive branch is going overseas, the president's going overseas and signing agreements that have the appearance of treaties. They look like treaties to people, and they're talked about like they're treaties,
Yeah.
but actually they're not treaties, because in order to have a real treaty, you have to have Senate approval. So yeah, Congress needs to be involved in this. If the president goes overseas and signs something and says, now the United States is a party to this contract, it is absolutely not true. The United States is not beholden to other countries unless the Senate has had a say. Anything the president does overseas that it has the appearance of a treaty but doesn't have Senate approval is not truly a treaty. It's not the law. It's just an executive branch promise, and it only lasts as long as that executive branch leader is in office, as long as that president's there, and only to the extent that that person has any authority to do that, which often isn't the case anyways. Often that person doesn't even have the authority to do it.
Right. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. For so many people, they don't understand that, it's not very well defined. Of course, our media don't share the ins and outs, and it's happened over and over. So good to hear your clarification of that for everyone listening as well. I really appreciate that. And then the last question, I'd love to hear your thinking on the crisis at the southern border. What real reform would you bring in as a U.S. Senator to our immigration issue? I mean, we've needed reform for a long time. How would you propose to address this crisis?
It's a great question. And I'll preface it by saying I'm the son of a refugee. I'm the son of an immigrant. My parents came here legally. They followed the laws of the country. My dad received a sponsorship when he came here as a refugee. My mom came here legally and followed all the laws. And that's the way it should work in this country, where people come here, they follow the laws, they become American citizens if they'd like. And look what's happened in my own family. When that happens, when the process is followed properly, when we have people who come here and can just integrate into society, they end up having kids who become United States congressmen. They end up having kids who come here and love this country. So I'm for immigration as long as we're doing it the right way. But what's happening right now at the southern border is people are just streaming in. There are no checks on it. And this is very frustrating to Americans who, when we travel overseas and we come back to the country, we're still asked for some of our papers and proof of identity. And yet there are people who are crossing the border at the southern border, and they're not being asked anything.
Right.
And for someone like me, who is the son of a refugee and the son of an immigrant, I want immigration to work in a way that allows people to come to this country and be a part of it, because I think that immigrants can add a lot to this country, but they have to come the right way. And if we don't have a southern border that is secure, then the people I'm trying to persuade about immigration aren't going to buy into it. They're not going to go along with it. Nobody's going to say, yeah, let's expand immigration while the southern border looks the way it does. So you have a president in Biden right now, at least he's currently the president as we're speaking.
Yeah.
Who knows
My gosh.
if it will stay that way.
Wow.
But we have a president who has let people just stream in. He hasn't used proper enforcement. And I do think that Congress also has a role to play in ensuring that we have the resources down there to make sure that the border is secure, and that we have the people who can handle people who try to come in as asylees and immigrants.
Right.
But yeah, we definitely need to secure that border so that we can then move to the next step of improving the overall immigration system.
Right. Great. Thanks so much, Justin. Really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
your time with us today and the answers, and good luck on the campaign trail. I know, what is it, about 2 weeks left to go?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say, please get out there and vote on August 6th. It's really important. There's a primary. It's extremely important. You can go to justinamash.com and find me on X at justinamash. So please go vote on August 6th.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eileen.